Hi, welcome. This is our first episode of Prior Written Notice. I'm Valerie. I'm an educational consultant and advocate, and I am here with two of my friends who are amazing advocates and former educators, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
I'm Carly. I am a former behavior interventionist and educator too, and I'm super excited to be here with these two and talk about all the things related to IEPs, special education, and 504s.
Same. My name is Ria Davis. I am an educator turned advocate, and I've been working with these lovely ladies for a while now. And I'm really excited to join you guys and be talking more about the IEP process and all of the things involved with special education, 504s, and I have some background with behavior as well, and also with RTI. So I'd love to shed some light on that as well.
So we all come to the table with different experience. I was a teacher who primarily taught students with specific learning disabilities or who qualified under other health impairment due to like ADHD or anxiety. And I taught middle school, high school, and alternative education, a lot of students who were young families. And I then was an administrator. So I saw both sides of the table and understanding why certain decisions are made, even when it feels like different decisions should be made. The great thing about this group in front of you is we also have, like Carly was saying, a behavior background, and Carly did mostly middle school, right, Carly? Is that right?
I did elementary, third through fifth grade, and then I went to high school in the we called it activity of daily living classes with students who were on the certificate track, not the diploma, and then I did middle school
And then
behavior.
we have Ria, who really likes little children,
Yes,
working
I
with
have
little
worked
children.
with all ages, but I am really passionate about working with the little ones, specifically K through two, and pre-K as well. I don't want to leave the little ones out, but I really enjoy that time. I think that it's just such a special time of childhood, and it's so formative for them, and you really want to make sure that any concerns are being addressed when they're coming up, and not, let those build up through middle and high school.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in addition to all of us being former educators turned advocates, we're all also parents, which I think is a really important piece that we bring to the puzzle. We understand what it's like to be busy. We understand what it's like to lose track of time. If I don't write down the vacations, I forget they're happening, and my children have to remind me they have days off of school. I have three, and I'm a single mom. So, I think we bring that to the table. My children are older. I think mine are the oldest in the group. I have a 14-year-old, a 16-year-old, that sounds so old, and a little guy who's almost 12.
And then I've got a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old. So mine are still pretty little, but I think Carly, yours are littler.
I have only one right now, and she is just over 1 year old. So I'm new to this world, but you know, excited about it.
I think one thing that we all bring to the table is the understanding and awareness of, is my child meeting milestones? Like for Carly's, age,
Hmm.
what does it mean if they're not meeting milestones? What is it when you hear your friends say like, "Oh my gosh, my child's walking and your child is sitting and crawling a little but doing an army crawl." And that feels weird. And then your children start school and maybe your child doesn't like school versus your friend's child who is up at 6 a.m. every day getting their clothes on and ready for breakfast. And so I think in addition to having the awareness of how we can help give you ideas to work more effectively with schools, we understand what it's like at the same time to have children who are humans and they do their own thing. And sometimes it's tricky. So we'll bring both perspectives to the table. And we're so happy you're here. Welcome to Prior Written Notice with Ria, Carly, and Val.
This is the topic of our week. We're talking about emotional IEP meetings and the challenges that come with being a parent, coming to a meeting, talking about and hearing about your child and how the team is lifting up the weaknesses. And sometimes that's all you can hear. Even if the team's like really trying hard to give strengths, all sometimes like you're seeing and hearing is just like weakness, 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 need. And you just feel like it's so overwhelming. So we're going to kind of dive into some ways to prepare for that, manage those emotions, and really feel confident and empowered going into these meetings, that you know what to expect and then what tools you have kind of in your toolkit when things start to get a bit too emotional. But also just knowing that's normal and normalizing that, and not help, like, we don't want you to feel like there is any shame or guilt if you do become emotional in meetings. Because like Val shared, like there's been moments when she's become emotional. I work with families who become emotional. So we'll talk through a little bit of that today, but we're going to dive into a couple tips that we have for you as you prepare for IEP meetings.
And I think this is a great one to start with because the reality is it is emotional, like Carly was saying, and it can be
Mhm.
really hard to hear the positives when there is potentially a really big focus on some areas of need. I had a meeting once for a high school student. We had been collecting data for a while because the family had asked if the student was in the right placement. The student was exhibiting higher levels of anxiety. The student was reducing preferred activities. They didn't want to do football anymore, and that was one of their favorite things to do. They were pulling back from friends. There was clear evidence that something was going sideways with schooling. And when we gathered more information, it was very clear the student needed a lot more help than we were providing in the current model. And so we had the data and we sat down and we met as a team and we were going over what a great child this student was. And then we were talking about the needs of the student, which was the purpose of the meeting that the parent had requested. And all of a sudden the parent got really quiet and we looked over and the parent started just banging his fist, and this was like a really big parent, like he was 6'2" gentleman, and he started banging his fists on the table and he screamed like a really big yell, and he yelled at us and said that we weren't doing our jobs, and the administrator had to get campus security. I mean, it was really upsetting. And it was, so he was escorted out, the student was escorted out. We were able within a week to do a phone follow-up and get the student into the right placement, and it absolutely was the right new placement, and the student got the support that they needed. But I remember thinking, I still can think about it like it was yesterday, and it was over a decade ago, but it was so many things, right? It was this, the parent did, while they were yelling, say it's just like when I was in school. So he was like reliving his own school
Mhm.
needs and that had never been addressed. So even though we were addressing the needs, the parent couldn't hear it. Like he was completely shut down in what he could hear. And so there were some things that I think we're going to talk about today that could have helped, that were not done for this parent, and he didn't have the tools and we didn't offer them to him. And I know after that meeting I did change as a teacher, and if I noticed a parent was starting to escalate, I would say, like, let's pause. Let's just pause. And I think that's
Mhm.
what led me to start thinking more about how can parents have the tools so that nobody gets to that point.
And I think that's an
Mhm.
important point that you bring up is how how triggering it can be, right? Especially if you've already had those experiences yourself in school. Now you're reliving that as a parent, and you might not have the framework or the way to communicate, what it is that you really need from the school and what it is that your child might need. And whenever our emotions rise up, I've talked about this a few times in different places, but the more heightened our emotions become, the less we're able to think critically and really take in information, remember the information that we receive. So if you are in an IEP meeting, having these tools and strategies to help stay calm and help stay regulated can really help you out in the long run with managing your child's IEP.
For
Mhm.
sure. I think the first
Yeah.
tip for all families is to prepare. So Ria, when
Mhm.
you're working with families as an advocate, how do you advise them to prepare for the meeting, whether it's a full IEP, an initial, a triennial, or just an amendment that they've asked for to review things?
So I think one of the biggest things for me is beginning with the end in mind. So we got to know what we're going in with and what we're asking of the team and what we're kind of expecting to come into. And a big piece of that is to have notes, having those written down, having notes ready and prepared when you go into the meeting, and then also taking notes when you're at the meeting because it is really stressful. So you might not remember every little detail, but when you're writing down notes, or even if you have someone with you to help with that, that can really cut down your stress in the meeting, but also later on. And then another thing I want to work with my clients on is making sure that we're ready for anything that might come up, right? So we've got our end goal in mind, but we're also going through the key points that we have in mind for that kiddo and making sure that we address those topics and we really we know what we're going in with, and we know that those are the non-negotiables of things that we're going to talk about in that meeting.
Mm-hmm. Those are really good points. Um, Something I was thinking about as you're saying that, Ria, was like a lot of times we put a big emphasis on like the school sending home the draft, right? Which state to state, district to district, this can be different. And so sometimes if like that's not your district's policy, that's not the state policy, because it's not standard under IDEA. Um, if you don't get that draft sent home, another way to kind of prepare is like we was saying, like go through your current IEP, like look at what is there, be familiar with that so that you know when they do come to the table, like requesting or talking about present levels, you can look back at the current IEP and see where the goals were. And look, does that make sense? Am I prepared for that conversation? And just even taking notes on the current IEP that you have so that that's going to guide your conversation. Because again, you like ideally you have the draft in front of you so you have an idea of what's to come, but if not, at least you are able to reference what is currently in place, which will really help you be a part of that informed decision making as the team progresses.
I think another great thing, so Ria was talking about, go in with the end in mind. So let's say the end goal is to discuss the 4 topics that you've written down that you want to go into the meeting and have some kind of discussion on. And you have a 40-minute meeting. It's also important to keep an eye on the clock. And I have had clients, and I have said in meetings myself as a teacher or administrator, I have said, like, I know that we wanted to address these 4 topics. We've spent 20 minutes on topic 1. I suggest we move on, even though it hasn't been fully agreed upon, so that we can at least touch on these other topics. A, sometimes one of those other topics can end up solving problem 1. And B, I think it's respectful to everybody at the table that we're going to get through these things that we've all agreed to, that we're going to discuss. But I think that's where having things written down can help, because it can be really easy to forget, oh, I had 2 more things I wanted to say. So.
Right along those same lines, don't be afraid to ask for a break. If you need a break to digest things, if you need a break just to kind of regroup and refresh and look back over those key points, or, jot a few things down, feel free to, tell the team, like, I just need a few minutes. And along with that, what you do with those few minutes can be really helpful. So if you are feeling really stressed out and you really want to start kind of decompressing so you can come back fresh, one thing that I really like I love different mindfulness and breathing techniques and things like that. But one of my favorite things to do is something that you don't need really anything for except your hand. And you just trace your hand and breathe in and breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. It's quick, it's easy, it's something you can do in one place. You can go use the restroom, do that, grab a drink of water. And that just helps to reset everything for you and help you really kind of come back refreshed. And I, want to emphasize asking for a break, that's totally fine. You should be able to do that during the meeting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's one of the strategies that we're suggesting along with these things is that break that we're asking for. And what does that kind of look like? So if you're in a conference room with teams, that could look like you saying like, hey, can we have the room for 5 minutes? That can look like if you're online in a virtual setting, asking for a break where everyone turns off their mic and cameras and you step away. Maybe you have an advocate or somebody you're working with who you can call during that time. And just like, they can guide you through kind of processing something, or it is just you taking a second to do some deep breathing work. But there's different ways to kind of do this. I've worked with clients where in the meeting, we kind of saw the emotions were starting to rise. It was a hard conversation, rightfully so. The parents started to feel a bit like frustrated and overwhelmed with the information that was being shared. And so, I stepped in as an advocate, just said, like, can we have 5 minutes? And, one of the parents went out and just kind of took a little lap for a second, just because, like you said, we talked about at the beginning, like you really can't anticipate what emotions are going to come up in this process. So when they do come up, be willing to, address them and feel comfortable knowing that you have these tools in your pocket to again, in the moment, acknowledge those feelings and then trying to regulate so you can continue with that meeting. But it's also okay that along the lines of taking those breaks, if it feels like you cannot continue this meeting where you're at right now, that you ask to table the conversation. That is perfectly fine. Because nothing will be accomplished if it just continues to escalate with those emotions. So again, knowing that that is something that is allowable, it is perfectly doable, and just having the language to request that in those moments. And like the story that Val said, in the moment they had to table the conversation, and then they came back within a week and continued what the meeting to continue. So it is absolutely doable. There are no hard and fast rules that say you can't pause a meeting and table it. So just again, along the lines of taking breaks, if it has to be a break where you leave the meeting that day, that's perfectly fine too.
Absolutely. Ria, I really liked your breathing technique. I'm not the best at breathing techniques. I've helped students with breathing techniques, but they don't help me. So I think knowing what helps you when you start noticing your body become dysregulated, we do so much work to help our children stay regulated. And I don't think we always do the same for ourselves, depending on, especially depending on your generation. I'm a Gen Xer, so like it was just kind of make it work. I think we've gotten better since then. But I think, like, I know for me, when I take a break, I actually like to step out and step away so that nobody can see me. And I do like a full body shake, and it's like shaking off the
Mhm.
emotion and getting it off of my body. And then I can walk back in. And I've done that in so many different roles. And so knowing what works for you, I think, is really important. So if it's what Ria suggested of tracing your palm, your hand and doing the breathing that way, if it's stepping out and doing a walk, like what Carly said, or stepping out and doing the closest thing you can do to a dance when you're at a meeting, whatever works, I think. But finding what works before the meeting, try some different things and
Mhm.
see what works, and then just use that because this isn't
Mhm.
going to be the only time you have a hard meeting with the school potentially.
Right.
I was just going to say that's another thing to keep in mind too, having a toolkit of strategies you can use because it's going to look a little bit different if you're, virtually meeting or you're in the school. You might be meeting in a different location than you're used to. All of these things can add up. They might seem like little things, but then they can add up to be sort of stressful. So another thing I like to for me personally, I really like sticky putty or the stuff that you like hang
Mm.
posters up with. So if you have like a stress ball or like a fidget or something that you can keep, in your pocket or under your desk as you're meeting, it is something to kind of just get that extra tension out. And then also going back to one of our points we made earlier about taking notes and having those notes, just the act of taking notes can funnel some of that energy.
Mm.
But also, it can be hard to make sure you're writing everything down while you're listening and then you're trying to process. So if you have someone that can come with you, if you have a friend, if you have an advocate, I know Valerie, you said on a break, maybe touch base with your advocate or your support person if they're not there with you. That can be really, really helpful just so you don't feel so isolated.
Okay, wait,
Mhm.
just to clarify, I'd love for one of you two ladies to answer. If I'm a parent going to an IEP meeting, am I only allowed to bring an advocate? Like, who can I
No,
bring with me? Because I have a really
you
good
can.
friend, but she doesn't even have
Yeah.
kids, but she's around my child a lot and she
Mhm.
knows him, but she's not an advocate and she's not even a parent. Who can come?
Yeah. Anyone you want to bring can come, with the caveat for yourself of knowing that like that person is going to be supportive to you and supportive to your child. Because while we want to bring people to the meeting that we, feel like are going to be beneficial, sometimes that person can derail the meeting on accident. So it's really important that you are allowed to bring whomever you want, whether it's a family member, a close friend, an aunt, or an advocate, that this person really understands their role going into this meeting with you, and whether are they an emotional support, are they there to be that person to raise the flag to say, hey guys, let's take a break because they're not feeling it as much as you are, and they have the capacity to maybe speak up and stop the meeting. Or like Rhea was saying, are they the person that is taking notes for you? Or are they the person that is really active listening while you're taking the notes? So really kind of sorting through what that role is going to look like. And that's something I think a lot of us do when we work with families, like pre-meeting, we'll talk about like, what is the strategy? What is my role going to be? How am I going to, kind of set you up for something in a meeting? Or how do you defer to me in a meeting? And just like we would do it with our clients, you do that with the person that you're intending to bring, because that just plays into the planning part of this. And like we talked about at the beginning, like knowing what is to come is going to really help kind of manage the emotions throughout. So knowing, hey, I can lean on Rhea in this meeting. If I start to get emotional, I'm just gonna like touch the sticky note, and that means that she's gonna ask for a break. So like just developing strategies like that, but making sure again that that person really understands what their role is going to be in this meeting and what your intentions are for the meeting. So some people come into the meeting really contentious and they're kind of going to bat for you, and you're like, whoa, that's not what I wanted. So just making sure again that you're on the same page.
Well, I think it's really important too when we're thinking about being on the same page and going back to just reviewing ahead of time as, we do with our clients. if they are planning on bringing that support person, or if they are, prepping before the meeting, going over the long-term goals, trying to figure out what the end goal of that meeting is and the key points, including that support person in on that meeting, or brainstorming that support person, or thinking through how am I going to convey this to this support person. And I think the what if game can kind of spiral quickly, so I don't like to play it too often. But I do think it's important in these situations to think about what ifs. What if the school says this, or what if I need a break, like you said? How can we communicate that, and how do we communicate during the meeting? I think, with my background in behavior, there's been situations where I've worked with students who are in crisis, and you guys might have had experiences like this too, where you want people there who are going to be supportive for that student. You want people that the student knows, or that know the strategies and accommodations, things like that. But there's a very fine line between having the support you need and having far too many people in the room. And that can
Mm.
kind of happen at IEP meetings too, where I want you to feel supported. I want you to feel like you have, the family, friends, advocates, whoever is behind you. But sometimes that can lend too many voices to the conversation. So I want to just circle back to what Carly said, of really making sure everyone is focusing on the goal, and you're really keeping the big picture in mind as you're moving forward with the meeting.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
agree. I think the only thing I would add is make sure that if you're bringing someone, you let the team know. And I
Yep.
would say, don't be secretive about who they are. I definitely, when I was an administrator, sat down in a meeting, and about 5 minutes in, I looked to the aunt who was the aunt, and I said, "Are you also an advocate?" And she said, "I am." And that doesn't help anything. Like, we weren't doing anything different than we would have done, but it felt like a gotcha. And I would just say, you don't want
Mhm.
to try to gotcha. That can make emotions of the team get really escalated. And then they're not able to come up with ideas and solutions because they're worried of what else might come at them. So I think being
Yeah,
collaborative and supportive to each other is a really important part of this process too.
that's a good point. And I feel like as you're saying that, Val, obviously we're talking about this from like the parent perspective, but just like know as a parent that teachers are emotional about IEP meetings too. Like I work with tons of teachers and school staff who are nervous to go into IEP meetings, or their anxiety is, raised that day, or they leave and they cry afterwards because it was a tough meeting. And so I think there's all types of perspectives and emotions going into the meeting. And so just kind of being, um, attentive to that. Obviously, your job is not to help that person regulate, but just knowing that the teachers and school staff also come into these meetings emotional and just committed to your student most of the time, just as much as they can. And so I think again, just offering that perspective and knowing that it is tough for some teachers, and some teachers leave and cry on their way home, just like some parents might leave and cry after a meeting. And it can be really emotional. And I think in those moments, just so we talked about, like you bring a support person, sometimes it's worth also having like a support person from the school team, like a facilitator who can, if they feel like the meeting has gotten really to a point where the team's not working together and there's too much emotions involved, having that neutral party come out and just be a facilitator is also a really good tool to use if you find yourself in that situation.
Absolutely. It's a good point. Um, One of the things that I was talking about was just simplifying your own speech as the family, but I think also knowing that you can ask the school to simplify their speech, because I think
Mhm.
sometimes emotions get really heightened if you walk in and you feel like you understand your child really well, and then the school team is saying words, it's English, but you're not understanding what they're saying, and you start getting really frustrated. And so just reminder, you can ask them to change up how they're saying or give you another example. There's actually rules under IDEA that you as the family have to be able to understand what is being said because you're a part of the IEP team. And so if you're starting to get really heightened with your emotions and your verbal comprehension and processing is going down, your receptive language is going down, you can just say, like, let's simplify that. Can you say it a different way? Can you say it shorter? And they should be able to do that. I don't know if you guys have been in meetings where you've needed to just kind of take a step back and slow it down.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yes. we have definitely, and I think that kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier, Valerie, the story that you shared about maybe if that had happened, if we could
Yeah.
just slow down, sometimes that really makes the difference. And I've had a very similar story to yours where, I mean, almost the same story, just a couple details different. And it was a situation where later on we really just needed to hold conferences by phone moving forward, just for everyone's safety and things like that. But having just, I think the biggest thing, you might really be frustrated and things might be tense and you have concerns about the IEP. But I think as long as you can remain calm and ask the questions that you need to ask, then you're likely to move forward in a positive way. And to go back to what you were saying, Valerie, of the school simplifying their language, I think asking for other examples, like you said, is a great tool, but also asking, what does this look like? What does this look like in the classroom? Could you just walk me through an example of this? Or
Yeah.
how does my child complete this? What does he do? What does she do? That kind of stuff. And I think that that can really be helpful. I don't think anybody's really expecting any parent to walk in having all the answers or knowing, exactly where they're going, what they're doing, how to write an IEP. Because as a parent, you're the parent, right? You know your child and you come in as the expert on your child. So the best that you can do is maintain your, composure as much as possible. And using these strategies, I think, is really the first step. And that can be really helpful in those collaborative meetings.
Mhm. So let's review. What is our prior written notice? What are our things that people are taking away from this meeting?
So I
I
think it's
think,
just the steps, right?
yeah, I think knowing that you should prepare in advance, you really should. If you don't have a copy of the IEP, you can ask for it. Start with the teacher. I think making sure that you're using some of the mindfulness techniques. I think Carly and Ria had some really good ones that you can utilize. Taking breaks is really important, and then I'll let one of you two kind of finish up some of the tips.
Go ahead, Ria.
So yes, Valerie, I'm sorry. Um, Taking breaks, bringing a support person and making sure you have worked with that support person in terms of just beginning with the end in mind, prepping them for what to expect, what their role is, and kind of what you expect from them being there. And I think it's really important overall, whether you have someone with you or not, focusing on the goal, focusing on the outcome rather than the in the moment. Sometimes it can kind of get back and forth. So focusing on that big picture goal. And last but not least, really using simple language and asking the school to do the same whenever you need clarification or just want a better understanding of what's going on. Feel free to ask them for simple language as well.
Thanks for hanging and chatting with us today. We hope you took away some actionable steps from today's recording and our podcast. As always, you can find us on social media on TikTok and Facebook and Instagram, which is linked in our show notes for more quick information and tips around preparing and coming to your IEP meeting. Tune in next week. And if you enjoyed watching and listening, please be sure to like and share our podcast.